I got some new podcasting gear, Joe.
Ooh, fun. Podcasting gear for the win, always. What is it?
I have this microphone on an Elgato low profile wave boom arm, which is really great because now I can just swing it out of the way like this.
Nice work. I saw these things when they first came out. I've tried to keep up with Elgato, Corsair, all the fun things that they do. And I saw their boom arms, and they released a bunch of stuff. That was just one piece
Yep.
of what they released, and it looked super fascinating. I don't remember how much they are, but they look like they designed it really, really well, but that's standard for them.
Well,
Seems.
this low profile boom arm means it's basically like on top of the desk. It doesn't do the thing where it goes up and comes back down and sits on top of the keyboard and gets in the way when I try to type, which is really what I like about it. And I've had my eyes on one like this from OC White, which has been like $350, and I could never justify spending that much money. This one was $100, and it's solid. I love it. I also got a HomeKit enabled surge protector, which the LEDs behind me are going to be linked to. It's coming today.
Okay.
And that I'm going to program into the Stream Deck so that I can. Right now, I have to use the remote to turn those on, but I will be able to use my Elgato Stream Deck shortly to turn on the LEDs behind me as well.
Nice work. I've been trying to figure out how to get into a detached garage without having to have a remote or a key. So we'll see. We'll see.
That's what you do when you have a week off. You play with your office setup, which is perfectly fine, and try to make it better.
Yep. It's like, my office is amazing. I think it's really great. It's set up perfect. What can I change?
Exactly.
I'm not leaving it unlocked, Blake. I'm not doing that. There's too much like woodworking gear and cars and vehicles and stuff in there. Nope.
I also, over the last week of my sabbatical, got the results back from my DNA test.
And where are you from?
Primarily France, apparently.
What?
Yeah.
I would not have guessed you were French.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah.
That's
like 69% or something like that. But the annoying part about the 23andMe test that I did was it gives you the ancestry report, but it doesn't actually fill in the people. It has like a projected ancestry tree based off of other people who have accounts.
Okay.
But it really doesn't give you the family tree, like these are your relatives based on your DNA, like I thought maybe it would. They do have a premium subscription, $30 a year, to get additional reports. So maybe that stuff is added there. But this has been a follow-up item for me for a couple of episodes now because I bought the test and then I sent it in and I was waiting on my results. So my results came back a little bit early. I was super excited to get them. And in the 23andMe app, you can go navigate through the different reports and things, and they analyze your DNA. So like, do you have the variants that are predisposed to late onset Alzheimer's or whatever, which I do not have those. But other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot of insight I got from these reports. I'm debating whether I want to sign up for the subscription just to see if there's something else cool to be gleaned there. But I kind of resent the fact that I would have to do that. So I spent $100 on the test. Just give me something useful. A lot of it is like, you probably don't have a tendency towards overeating, or you probably don't have a fear of heights based on your results, which is not what I was expecting at all.
Sure.
My experience with the general statements that they've been making is like, you probably don't have this, you probably do have this, whatever, is they're right about half the time. So I was like, well, this is kind of pointless.
Yeah, I have a friend who did the full test and then did do the subscription, and they send her occasionally new results. Like, this is more accurate now because we've figured out how to do this now that we have enough data. And because so many people are taking the test, she can learn more about her own. But it takes, the extra $30 a year to be able to get that. So I get why they do. When you first said there's a subscription, it's like, wait, what? How do you get a subscription on a one-time test? But then it occurred to me, like, oh yeah, they do the repeating data thing where you can get more later on. So it makes sense, I suppose.
Kind of disappointed by that one
How
though.
many subscriptions can we
Yeah, I'm
do?
not.
That you would need a subscription to get that?
Yeah, I'm not a. I don't know. I mean, I knew there was a premium report available. I did not know it was a subscription, and I was a little disappointed by the level of insight I got from the standard one. That's all. I was expecting a little bit more.
Sure.
But oh well.
Give me more for my money.
I've got 2 other action items here to follow up with. One is to walk around my house every day. For the most part, I have done this while at my house. I have done this.
Yeah.
And this had nothing to do with the book. This was simply something that you had said in the last episode. So thanks to Joe.
Did you notice anything that changed as you did that? Did it point anything out, or is it just, oh, there's still a gutter on the
It
house?
pointed out that I need to do a better job of weeding.
Sure.
There's like this part of the house which is way in the back corner. No one ever goes over there, and there's a bunch of weeds in the rock bed which annoy me. So I've been pulling them.
Nice. Well, there you go. It's at least helped you maintain your garden, your yard better.
My rocks.
Your rocks. Yeah. You have clean rocks.
Yep. Exactly. Part of it is there was like a barrier thing. It's just like rocks around the side of the house. There really isn't any plants back there at all. But the barrier has long since decayed, so there really isn't one at this point. And yeah, I don't like weeding. That's what I've discovered.
I don't either. I'm good with trimmers and mowers and power equipment that make weeds go away. Also sprays. Sprays make weed goes away.
Yes, that is true. The other action item I had was write down everything I'm unhappy with. I did not write down everything I'm unhappy with. I did write down a few things I'm unhappy with.
When I was reading this beforehand, like just kind of going through the outline so I could prep for today, I read this one, write down everything I'm unhappy with. And it occurred to me, I wonder if that's possible. Like, is that even doable to actually write everything you're unhappy with? Because there's always something you can discover more.
Probably not. And that's kind of why I aborted this one. There's a couple specific things that I've just been mulling over is like, well, how do I change this specific thing? And then I just was looking for more things, and I realized this is really unhealthy because it's just making me angry about how bad things are.
Yeah.
And they're really not that bad.
Yep.
That's just where I'm choosing to focus for the sake of an action item. Why am I doing this?
Yep. I have to say, when you told me you were going to shoot for this, I was like, I feel like this is going to, like, the day that he chooses to do this is going to be a bad day. Like it, whether you start it out that way or not, it's going to end up that way. Like that's what went through my brain.
That's accurate. So sorry, Brianna Wiest, I tried, but this is where you and I part ways.
It's
one
true.
thing I did figure out, which has had the opposite effect, I actually enjoy this one a lot, is I've been playing with this quick add plugin for Obsidian.
Okay.
Which allows you to insert text after specific headings in certain notes. So you can format it to add it to the note in the daily notes folder, which is formatted with today's date, year, dash month, dash date.
Sure.
So that's what I use for my daily notes files. And then I've got different sections for learnings, journal entries, and gratitude. And I've set up 3 separate actions so I can hit Command P to open up the command palette, select quick add, learnings, whatever. It gives you a text box. You type it in. It formats that as the value token, puts it in a bulleted list, adds the appropriate tag, and sticks it in the appropriate section inside the daily note.
Okay.
So I've been doing that with gratitude. It's helped me journal my gratitude at the end of the day a lot better.
Good work.
Yeah, it's available on mobile too, which has also been a big key in helping this to stick. So I think this is sort of an ancillary action item for me.
Sure.
It's like doing the negative one showed me the importance of the positive one. So
Yep.
I've done a bunch of stuff to help me do that more frequently at the end of the day. I always do the daily questions, like the tracker, the 1 to 10. That part is solid. That sticks. But then I figured out this part with the quick add plugin in the command palette, which also works on mobile Obsidian. So I can do it from my phone at the end of the day if I haven't done it yet. And then I also created a shortcut which simply just asks a yes or no question, but it runs through my end of the day routine.
Okay.
So the first thing it asks is, did you time block tomorrow? Yes or no? Did you journal? Yes or no? Did you practice Spanish? Yes or no? Did you let the dog out? Yes or no? Did you set out your clothes for tomorrow? Yes or no? Are you ready for bed? Yes or no? And then if you keep hitting yes, it takes you to the next one. If you hit no, it just aborts the whole thing. And this
Okay.
fires at 9:45 every night. And basically, if I keep hitting yes, at the end it says, okay, charge your phone and go to bed.
Okay, nice. And does the data go anywhere, or it's just a confirmation to
There's
you?
no data. It's just something that pops up in my face,
Okay.
and it goes on right before my do not disturb kicks in at 10 p.m.
Sure.
as a reminder of like, hey, start this evening routine if you haven't yet so that you can get in bed by 10 o'clock.
Sure. Now, if you say no to any of those, and then you go do it and come back, do you fire it manually and do it again, or it's just a
No,
one-time
because
deal?
it's not a checklist. I'm not tracking whether I did these things. These are the things that have to get done before I go to bed. I do them. I just want to be triggered to do them. And I'm thinking just tapping yes is enough to get me through it.
Sure.
Where, I'm not trying to gather any data from it. It's really just a reminder for myself.
Okay. That sounds interesting. I don't think I would do this, but it sounds interesting.
It was pretty easy. I built it in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's going to stick or not, but I'm enjoying it at the moment.
It's fun. Well, I don't really have any action items to follow up on from last time. So Joe's been busy rebuilding a house. Other than that, I barely got through this book, and it had nothing to do with the book itself. It was purely time. And like I pulled 700 feet of electrical cable in our house this past week, which is the equivalent of rewiring 75% of the house. That's what that is.
Boy.
Super fun. So yes, I have no action items to follow up on here.
All right. Well, let's jump into today's book then, which is The Art of the Idea by John Hunt. This is a different type of book. It's got an interesting binding. It's like a cardboard hardcover sort of binding. And what did you think of the visual style of this one?
Whenever I opened the box that it came in, my gut reaction was, did I order a kid's book? You know, like the cardboard kids books? Like, that's what I thought it was. That was my... Because when I saw it, which way was it? I don't remember. I think I saw the top of it. I don't remember. I saw the side of it, and if you were to look at the side of it, you can see, like, the cardboard is super thick on the front and back cover. But my eyes tricked me and made me think all of the pages were those real thick cardboard pages, like, you know, a little kid's book. So whenever I picked it up and opened the first page and realized, oh, okay, yeah, that's not what I was expecting. So it was a very interesting experience at the very beginning.
Yeah. There's actually two people who contributed to this. They have both of their like bio pages in the back. John Hunt is the author, and there's another guy who did all of the illustrations. And so it's broken down into 20 different chapters, no different parts, just a bunch of short chapters that speak to a specific idea. It's kind of like Seth Godin with the practice, except not nearly as clearly organized, I would argue. It feels a little bit more kind of all over the place. But since it's talking about ideas and where they come from, I don't think that's necessarily off-brand either.
No, it made sense. I mean, it's like you're saying, it bounces all over the place, but it doesn't feel like any of those really build on each other either.
True.
Which is very reminiscent of the Seth Godin practice book as well, because there's a lot of that like you can just open it, find a section, and start, and you're fine. Like there's not really groundwork to build up to that. The only place that might fall down where that concept is crippled is the first chapter, probably, where he kind of entered, or maybe not the first chapter, but maybe the introduction to the book. Like you'd have to kind of read that to set the stage for ideas in general, and then you could jump in pretty much anywhere. But at the same time, I don't know when I've read a book where the introduction doesn't set up the rest of the book and people don't read it first and people would read it later. So that would be a bit strange as well. Thus, you could pick it up and go. That's my point.
Yeah. You can pick it up just about anywhere, and any of one of these would be like a self-contained idea. I do think they tie together, but they don't necessarily build on each other like you were saying. I feel the way he starts and the way he ends are very good. It feels like you're coming to closure with the book itself. But let's just jump into some of these sections. I added some to the outline here. We're basically picking and choosing specific ones. And if there's anything else you want to add to this.
No, this looks good.
Okay, cool. Because there's 20 of them. I didn't want to cover all 20. So I picked out, what are there, 8 here? And some of these are just a couple of pages. So the first chapter, I think, is a really good one. It's titled, You Get Sunrise or Sunset People. A sunriser is someone who gives out energy. A sunsetter is somebody who sucks energy. And I really like that definition. I'd not heard it put that way before, but I can totally see people in my life who fit those different categories. And it sounds kind of bad to do this, but I'm also the guy who did the action item of ranking every relationship in my life from minus to plus. So I'm all about this idea.
Yeah, I could see that. When I first saw the chapter title, my brain made the connection of people who get up early in the morning and have ideas, and people who have ideas before they go to bed. That's where I thought he was going to go with it, and then it was not that at all. That wasn't even touched here, but that's where I was going with it. But sunrise and sunset people, I think that's a really cool way to say that. Basically, it's, are the ideas and the energy side of it starting the conversation, or are they ending the conversation, as far as like social conversation, I guess, in general. But the hope is you'd be a sunrise person, not an energy sucker. Don't be an energy sucker.
That would be the hope. Correct. So I am familiar with this concept. Again, this comes back to emotional intelligence. Surprise, surprise. I just posted in the YouTube chat. We'll put it in the show notes as well. There is an article that I've been familiar with for a long time by Michael Hyatt called "Don't Hire People Unless the Batteries Are Included." And he's talking about this from a corporate perspective, where you want to hire people who have their own energy source, which he calls those with batteries. And by the way, he says he got this from Dan Sullivan's 10X Talk podcast, which Dan Sullivan is the unique ability guy. So unique ability 2.0 is the thing that I went through. He also has some crazy beliefs about living to be 150 or something like that. But this 10X Talk podcast, this is actually a pretty good one. I don't think it's one where I would recommend you go listen to every new episode. They seem to just kind of rehash a bunch of old stuff, but some of the conversations that they have on there have been really eye-opening for me as well. So I just want to point that out. Michael Hyatt is saying he got this from that podcast. He's kind of recommending it. I would second that recommendation if you're into this type of stuff. But the article is basically saying there are people that have their own batteries. They bring life to any work group that they're a part of. And then there are those that just suck the life out of every group that they're a part of. They enjoy and create drama. They gossip and backbite. They complain about everything. They need constant supervision. They won't accept responsibility, and yeah, your mind will instantly start labeling some people that you work with, I'm sure, that fit into those categories or have in the past anyways. I think there's a little bit of danger here in just kind of looking for people that you don't necessarily click with, because some of this I think is personality driven too. That's where like the Colby assessment can come in. I may have a very different learning style or working style as a high fact finder that somebody who is a high quick start, and that is naturally going to cause some friction as well. But I do think that this analogy, you can say this a bunch of different ways, and there is a lot of truth to this. Don't be the person that nobody wants to work with, because you just make things harder.
I couldn't help but see how this was connected to like growth mindset. That comes up almost every episode, it feels like. And with the growth mindset, like obviously you think that you can get better. Like that's the core. Do you think you can get better or not? That's the core piece of that. And when you're talking about a sunrise person who has the energy piece that they can give off and it goes to other people, it generally means they think they can get better because they know that they can give it to other people. I don't know how well I do with this, but I try to make sure that whenever I'm working with the growing team that I'm overseeing, it's a thing that I try to make sure that I'm giving the energy to people, to use this terminology, but I'm trying to make sure that they're empowered to do their own thing, and that I can encourage them to have that growth mindset as well. But it's kind of like giving the energy to folks, and the energy you're giving is the growth mindset. Like, that's kind of how my brain translated that and connected it, versus when you have people who have a fixed mindset and they don't think they can get better at things, and they think they're just dealt the cards that they have and they can't improve them. It seems like those people tend to be the ones that try to suck energy or become crazy makers, as another book I read that wasn't on Bookworm, I think, said. So the crazy makers tend to be the sunset people, but I feel like they're also the fixed mindset people as well. Now, I'm not certain how well that's connected, the growth, fixed, sunrise, sunset concept, but it's an idea, to use that I'm starting to consider, because it just seems like those are connected in some way.
Yeah, well, tying it back to ideas, that's obviously the goal of this book, right? So the people who are sunsetters, he says that they don't kill ideas, but they suck the oxygen from around them. So basically, you're leaving them to die.
Yes.
Which I think there's some truth in that. So is what it is. But yeah, don't be that person. I love this whole concept of ideas and where they come from, which is why I picked this book to begin with. And the next section I wanted to talk about is number 3, ideas have moods. And the first thing that really stood out to me from this section is that ideas can't be bossed into existence. In other words, you can't force it, which I agree with that. I also somewhat in practicality disagree with it, because I do think that creativity is a little bit like a formula. And we've talked about this before with Steal Like an Artist, Austin Kleon, how if you collect the right dots, then whatever comes out is kind of the natural outcome of the dots that you've collected. So you don't have to judge the output. I do think there's truth to that as well. But I love this whole concept here about allowing your ideas to germinate. On page 34, he says, if you allow these ideas to germinate a little, you also stand a good chance of them developing their own kinetic energy. He says, ideas love to bounce off one another. And I am very curious about how to make this happen. I think one way to do it would be to collaborate with someone. We have a version of this, I think, right now where we're recording Bookworm, but I've also just released an Obsidian course through the Sweet Setup. So can you make these ideas bounce on your own, do you think?
I think so, but that's me with an overactive brain. And I know that for me, whenever I need to stretch beyond where I'm currently at, I consume things I don't normally consume mentally, meaning watching intellectual YouTube videos from somebody I haven't watched them from before, or picking up a book that has a belief system that isn't my own or is outside of what I would consider fact, I guess, and combine that with silence in some form. That's my go-to methodology. Even house stuff, like whenever you're doing construction things, like you run into problems all the time. Like, you always find things or have to try to figure out how to make things work that you weren't planning on. And when I'm working with other people on those problems, and we get to a point where I realize we're not coming up with an answer very quickly here, my default is let's go do something else and come back to it in, say, 30 minutes to an hour. Like, let's go do some other small thing, completely unrelated, and come back to it. Whether that's going for a walk, taking the dog out, hammering nails, whatever it is, trying to do something else. Like, that to me is the percolation method in order to get those ideas to bounce off of the new stuff that I've been capturing. Like, that's my go-to method. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that seems to be, at least for me, my process.
Sure. So you get them to bounce by mode switching, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's a piece of it, yeah. You have to mode switch for a certain amount of time and then give yourself the space from the area that you're trying to get an idea within.
I agree with that. I think that's a very effective way to do it. I also have just been fascinated with this idea of note making inside of Obsidian. I got an email today as we record this, there's the bell, from Ryder Carroll, the bullet journal method, where he references a book which I tried to buy, but you cannot get it at the moment. It's by Edgar Wright. It was written in 1963, and it talks about note making versus note taking. And the book was on individual study habits, but I can't find it anywhere. I can't find an electronic version. I can't find one that I can order off of Amazon. And I really wish I could get that, because I love those like classic books that speak to these ideas that are kind of hot right now. And I think with note making specifically, that's popularized by something like Obsidian with the graph view and the bouncing things around between the different ideas. And I think there's a way to make this work. I shouldn't say it that way. I know there's a way to make this work. I'm curious to figure out what the best way is for this to work. Kind of the way I've landed on right now is I've got these MOCs. You can name them whatever you want. They're the active notes, right? And that's where you're collecting inputs and you're kind of synthesizing things and interjecting your own opinions. And the process of doing that helps me solidify my thoughts on a particular topic. And I'll include links to other relevant notes, and I'll use that graph view to bounce back and forth, sometimes kind of like I do with the cross-reference system I built with the sermon sketch notes that I do. But I'm curious to understand how this works at like a neuroscience level, how your brain fuses these things together. I can see the results. I can see that when I get an idea, I need to put it somewhere as like a holding tank and just let it percolate for a while. And I'll come back to it and I'll look at it and I'll see what else is relevant for that particular idea. And sometimes I'll get inspired and see connections and I'll add those. But I'm wondering, he talks in different sections in this book about all of the different factors that contribute to the life cycle of an idea. And I'm kind of trying to figure out, what are the levers I can pull in my idea greenhouse to give these things the best chance of survival. And one of the best things I think you could do is just talk to other people about it, which is what he's saying in this chapter. But I think there's a maybe somewhat more limited in terms of effectiveness version of this at an individual level as well.
I've been doing tons of construction stuff and rebuilding our house. And it's been fascinating to me to see the process that I'm going through in managing that. So I'm the general contractor on it. And very briefly, I've got it down to studs and framing in a lot of the house. So basically, you've got the whole thing being redone. So it's like building a new house. Sometimes I think building a new house would have been easier. So there's that.
New construction is easier than reconstruction.
It kind of is, yeah. But going through that process has forced me to stretch beyond my normal project management systems personally, and is therefore putting me in a spot where I can see where I have failed in doing so previously. And I think what you're talking about with like, how do you come up with these ideas, putting yourself in spots where you have to become very uncomfortable. Like the process of calling a whole bunch of subcontractors and borderline harassing them in order to get schedules and budgets and things on time and in place, like that is not me at all, but I'm forced into that. And that has put me in a spot where I'm a lot better on the phone than I used to be just within the last 2 months. And I've gotten to where I'm a lot better at helping other people do the work and service that I'm asking them to do. So like it's forced me to think about things a lot differently. And whenever I've gone deep into something that's brand new, like I have to learn things about a house that are very, very detailed and kind of subtle. And that has then led me to having connections between how do you rewire a breaker box for your house. And there are ways I've been learning that that's connected to how we choose books for Bookworm. And as weird as that is to say, whenever I've done my walks at night and whenever I've like gone deep into these new skills, like finding those connecting points seems to just happen when I give myself the space to let that happen.
Yeah.
But it only happens when I'm pushing myself beyond my normal limits, which is a little alarming when you think about how many people like to find their content little zone of life and habits and rituals, and they don't want to stretch outside of those and don't want to try to learn a new skill and push because they're not going to have those revelations ever if, obviously not regularly. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that could come from this process, but I think like what you're saying, like trying to develop ideas and figure out how to do that. There are so many ways you can do it. Like that's some of why this book exists, I would say, is because there's so many different avenues by which you can come up with them that it's hard to nail down what that process actually is.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't think if their goal is to give you a formula or a system at the end of it, that they do a good job of doing that. I don't think that's necessarily their intention. I feel like the arc of this is convincing you of the importance of it. The next one here kind of speaks to the error in the standard way that we collect things and maybe think of them as ideas.
Yeah.
But the next chapter I want to talk about is number 6. I Google, therefore I am not. This reminds me of liminal thinking, Dave Gray, where he talks about how the internet is a grocery store for facts. I have used that quote so many times. I love that. That's such a brilliant description.
Uh-huh.
Because it's so true that you can find a fact that supports any ridiculous argument you want to make online. And that's what people do. They cherry pick a couple of individual facts and they say, there, my argument is solid. No, it's not. I remember a conversation we had on Bookworm where you were collecting data and you were saying that I could make the data say whatever I wanted it to say.
Yep.
So the thing that in this chapter stands out to me is this differentiation between notes and mindless data. And as I'm thinking about notes and note making and managing ideas, I can see how I have shifted over the years. Back in the day when I was having everything in Evernote, I was jotting everything down from all of the meetings that we were having, and I could go back and I could find something that somebody had said years ago, and that's great. I used that a couple of times. But that's not the most valuable form of the note-taking, as I've come to understand it. That is, in my opinion, looking back now, kind of mindless data. And it makes me a little bit frustrated when I look back at that old stuff. I'm like, why did you write all this down? This was a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
You should have been jotting down other things, which I would consider now to be more important. And really the whole idea from this chapter is like, if you're taking notes, even notes from a book that you read, if you're just jotting down something smart that somebody says, that's not the same thing as capturing an idea. He talks about in this section that having lots of information doesn't make you any more clever. And he says on page 51 that ideas don't come from existing facts, but from the holes that you drill through them. So you have to take the Mortimer Adler approach, have this conversation with this person that you're reading this book about, understand their arguments and then try to figure out where they could be wrong and formulate your own response to that. That's where the ideas really come from.
Yeah, it's as you're talking about note making and capturing ideas and such, I just want to point out that this book doesn't really talk about idea management and idea capturing. It's talking about idea generation, really. Like that's, I think, important because I was under the impression that I was going to get at least some direction about idea management, so much so that over the last week as I was reading this, I was maybe halfway through it or so. I still thought that piece was coming, and I had someone who saw the book said, "What's that about?" It's like, it's coming up with ideas and managing those ideas and, you know, keeping track of them, externalizing them from your brain. That way you can review those and come up with even more ideas. And their comment was idea management, like you capture those and write them all down and keep track of them. Like, yeah, that's the concept. He said, "Oh, I'm too busy acting on my ideas to do that." And that kind of struck me like, that's fascinating. Well, okay, sure, I suppose. But I didn't get a chance to delve into that much deeper, and it was just kind of left there. But I haven't been able to get that comment out of my head since having that conversation. Too busy acting on ideas to write them down and manage them. Like that's, and it's just interesting. So I haven't figured out what I think about that one yet.
Well, I can tell you it makes me cringe.
I'm sure.
How, oh, man, what's your initial reaction to something like that?
If it was from someone who was not regularly coming up with things and creating and being successful with new things, if it was from someone who just, you know, worked a 9 to 5 and really didn't do anything outside of that, I probably would have just tossed it away. But this person regularly starts new businesses, turns around, sells them, and starts new ones again. So
sure,
I don't know what to do with that because they seem to be a credible person with this idea. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, Mike. I mean, I write a lot of things down, like ideas, obviously. I can't say that I review them regularly, nowhere near as regularly as you do. And I guess I just haven't figured out where to go with that concept yet.
Well, I mean, the thing that scares me about that approach is that I tend to have more ideas than I can take action on. So maybe if you don't have that many ideas, that approach is fine. Or maybe there's some internal filter that person uses to get rid of all the ones that they know aren't really the ones that are going to hit the mark, and they just never really thought through what that process is for themselves. I do think, based on some research that we've done, surveys and things at the Sweet Setup, that having more ideas than time is a pretty big problem for people. So I'm going to recommend to anybody, don't just act on an idea the moment that you have it, because otherwise you're never going to feel caught up. You're never going to be able to take action on everything that you feel you should be taking action on. There's always going to be something that's going to fall through the cracks. You're going to quickly find yourself in that place where, oh, just one more thing, just one more thing, just one more thing. So that I don't think is healthy. But that makes me wonder if it is possible to just limit a little bit the input of ideas. I'm not sure I would want to do that. I think I would rather just capture a whole bunch of things down in my notebook, which is actually my process. I jot things down when I think of them. And then at the end of the day, I transfer over the stuff that's really important. But 9 out of the 10 things that I capture inside of drafts or on my notebook don't end up in Obsidian, which is where they live for me.
Right.
And then that's kind of my greenhouse where I incubate them.
Yeah, I suspect in this case, now I know this person, and I know that he regularly, he's one of these people that whenever he's acting on something, it's his entire life that goes into it. And then when it's ready to be sold, he sells it and he's immediately on to the next thing. My suspicion is kind of like what Blake and Martin are talking about in the chat, is like the concept of triaging and choosing what to act on. I suspect that he's insanely good at that and knows that he's going to have thousands of ideas, but can tell when can tell when he needs to act on one that comes up. Like he knows which one to move on next immediately. Like he's just incredibly good at making that decision. I don't think I'm that good at that, and I'm also not, like, the two things going on there is he's really good at choosing, but he's also really good at focus. So he's got those two things happening. I feel like I'm decent at choosing and terrible at focus. So that process doesn't work for me now that I'm processing this out loud. So I would suspect that this is a bad thing for most because they don't have those two. Most people don't have both of those going for them. That's, I think, my point.
Sure. Maybe the size of the idea filters in here too. I mean, that kind of gets into the next section. Number 8 is incremental change is fine if you're a glacier, which I picked this one specifically because I think it flies in the face of some of the habit stuff that we've read. He didn't actually say this in the book, but kind of my reconciliation of this with atomic habits, tiny habits, all that kind of stuff, is that your ideas should be big, but your actions should be small. Again, that doesn't fit exactly with the guy who's building and selling businesses that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
Although maybe it does. Maybe what I would define as a big idea is really a small idea to that person because they've done it so many times. I don't know. I suppose size is relative here when you're talking about ideas, but I'm curious what you think about this, thinking big but acting small. I feel like this is the only path forward for me.
Yeah. I think there's two things. The relative piece is absolutely true because I've consulted with churches on how to do a technology infrastructure in their church, whether that's networking or audio, video, doesn't matter. Take your pick. But whenever I've consulted with them, I'm always asking two things. What's your budget? And how many people are coming here? Because those two dictate what scale we're talking about. Because the scale that I operate on here at our church is much, much larger than most churches out there. And I go to churches who are much bigger than us to learn where my next steps are. So if you're asking me to help design the technology, call it the video structure for your church, those are going to be my questions. What's your budget and how much are we talking about? Because the idea that I'm going to put together for you could either be 14 cameras and like 3 video switchers and a 10 computer setup, or it could be 1 computer and 1 camera. Like, the scale of that idea that we're going to put together is going to be drastically different depending on the situation. So I think that relativity piece there is important. But I also am intrigued by this concept of like big ideas and small actions, because I feel like some ideas require massive action to even start. And
sounds very Grant Cardone-ish.
it does.
Yes.
Yeah. And Richard Branson and like all sorts of like, you want to start an airline company? Sure. Just buy a $10,000 plane ticket. Like, that's not a small thing. Like, sure. But that's, I think maybe it was more than that. I'm drawing a blank on the number at this point, but actions should be small. I mean, obviously that's reminiscent of atomic habits or tiny habits or change your routines and rituals. Like it's obviously reminiscent of that. But I can't help but think there are times when massive action is required. I mean, take the house thing I just started on. Like, if I were to do small actions for that big idea, I'd be without a house here before too long. So
Sure.
that won't work. That's requiring extremely massive action in a very short time frame.
I think I would argue that if you took this massive action approach, though, as soon as you got done with this, you found another house to do the same thing. At some point in the very near
that
future,
won't happen.
you won't have a house anyway.
It's not going to happen. Yeah, I've talked to a few folks, one of which was our real estate agent that helped us buy it. And he's like, man, if you ever wanted to flip houses, you guys would be amazing at this. I'm like, nope. Like, this is a one and done scenario. Like, this is not happening again. So yes, I think you're absolutely right. The massive action thing, I think, can work, but it's a short-term thing. It's not a ongoing piece. So maybe the time period is important here if we're talking about small actions versus massive action. I'm not sure which would be applied in each case.
That kind of leads into the next section, though, or the next question that I would ask would be, well, how do you know which one is the one that you're supposed to put massive action behind?
Yeah.
You can't put massive action behind every idea. So there must be some sort of criteria for determining which of these ideas are the good ones. And good is a very subjective term as well, based off of maybe how complex they are. Do you have the knowledge that you need to do this thing? Can you get the knowledge that you need? Do you have the time and the energy and the capability to do this? Do you need to bring in outside help? Can you bring in the help that you need? Is it cost prohibitive? I mean, there's so many other things that could basically rule out any of these big ideas that you should take massive action on. I guess that's the part that I am struggling with after reading this, because this book is kind of, I would argue, about creating a culture where these ideas can be birthed so you don't kill them prematurely, so you are constantly getting them, but then there really isn't a whole lot in terms of, okay, so this is the process that you follow in terms of making this a reality. And I understand why, because that's going to be very, very different. An idea that I am collecting to write an article is very different than your idea to redo your house.
Yeah. Because let's take this to the next step. So we've been collecting ideas of projects to do on the house, right? And the scale of collecting ideas for articles to write, each of those is a project, right? There's hundreds of actions that go into that, especially at the scale of the suite setup. The projects that I'm collecting ideas for are, do I take out this wall? Do I move the garage door 6 feet to one side? Do I tear a wall out in the garage and add a doorway? Like, these are not
what happens if I theoretically find a giant wasp nest in the ceiling?
Exactly, yes, which happened. If I, and each of those has runoff projects that come with it. And a prime example, we decided to take, a certain ceiling out of the house. Well, that then dictated a wall coming down. It dictated changing the ventilation in the attic. It meant rerunning wiring in there. It meant redoing lighting, and it meant redoing ductwork. All because we decided to take a ceiling out. So you never know. In this particular case, I never know when a small project becomes one massive project. So you don't know that. But those ideas that we're collecting for what to do on the house, I know each of those isn't it's not a 7 to 10 day project like an article can be, or shorter for an article. It's a 3-month project of nights and weekends. That's what that is. So saying yes to a project isn't a small thing in that case. But if I was collecting ideas for books to read, like we've talked about on Bookworm, because we run through books so fast, the decision factor, like how important that decision is on what book we're going to do next, is very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know we're only going to spend 2 weeks with it. Now, if it was a 2-year process and we were going to dissect every sentence of the entire book, that would be a much bigger decision. We would spend a lot more time on it, and it would be a much more involved process. So deciding on those ideas but that's like a whole nother topic. It's not even covered in this, like how deciding which ones to act on. This is just coming up with them.
This is like the first part of a series.
It's so true. So true.
Or could be a potential series. Yeah, and I deciding what to write on. I mean, it's not always just like small stakes. What article am I going to publish? I think a bigger version of this, but still very much in that format for me, would be the decision to create the Obsidian course. Because for a long time, I was messing around with Rome, and then I started playing around with Obsidian, and then I saw some things happen in the app ecospace, whatever. And I was like, I think Obsidian's going to be a big thing for a long time. If we built a course right now, we could be Evernote Essentials for Obsidian. And I use that as an example just because I've met Brett Kelly and I know how he wrote that one book, and then it kind of catapulted him and set him on a totally different career trajectory, because it was the right thing at the right time. So I had a feeling like Obsidian is the thing we should be focusing on right now, but I really didn't know that. And I want to know, like, what are the things that contributed to that hunch, basically? Can I quantify that? If I could create an idea scorecard to rate my ideas as I have them, what would be on there? And I honestly don't know. I was hoping to get a little bit of clarity at the end of this book, but that I don't think really happened. This particular section on incremental change being fine if you're a glacier, the big inspiration for me from this is just to think a little bit bigger. I think I tend to focus on things that I can see clearly in the horizon, but a big idea you really don't know. It's out there a ways. And so I think I tend to gravitate towards what is safe and knowable. So I don't have an action item associated with that. Actually, I don't think I have any action items for this entire book.
Yeah, I don't either. But I think what you're saying makes sense because, like, we tend to try to come up with, like you're saying, coming up with bigger ideas. We tend to try to come up with ideas for bookworm books or ideas for, video courses and et cetera, et cetera. But those are all ideas designed to fill time that were already devoted to doing that type of task.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a big difference between coming up with ideas for an already dedicated time slot and coming up with ideas that require a lifestyle change.
Sure. Yep.
And dictate a change in time priorities. So whenever you're trying to come up with big ideas like that, generally, at least the way I started to think about this, was designed to help you think about how would your life change if you were to have an idea that would then change other people's lives. Like, those are the ideas I think that he's encouraging us to try to develop, the ones that would require a change of not only how I live, but the people around me and the people that I'm connected to. Like, those are the size of ideas that I think he's encouraging us to come up with. Not necessarily like, how do I come up with a Siri shortcut to unlock and lock my door automatically for me? Like, those are fun ideas, but fairly insignificant and minor, if inconsequential at all.
So my ideas aren't good enough? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Some ideas just aren't cut.
All right. Well, that kind of leads into the next one. Chapter 11 has the longest title in the book. It says, an idea is a paradigm-shifting moment that forward projects future potential in an initially ethereal but progressively tangible manner. So that title alone...
Couldn't shorten that one down at all? Come on.
Yeah, I think that was deliberate. But I think that does kind of speak to what we were just talking about of how they define an idea. They're not thinking of how can I improve my workflow? They're thinking of how can I completely change my career?
Yes.
Which is, I don't know, a little bit scarier, but also a topic that I'm not quite as interested in, to be honest, because I feel like those types of ideas, you can get them different places, but it's really, really hard to judge or grade them well. Whereas an idea for this is how I view the world, whether it comes out in an article or just, something that I internally work through, I feel like that has more tangible everyday benefit as it pertains to not just reading, although that's primarily, I think, the source of new information for you and I when we're collecting these ideas. But it could be YouTube videos, it could be podcasts. I think books are a higher quality source than maybe some other places that people look for ideas, but that's just me. This whole section, though, talks about being a faux intellectual, and this is the thing I wanted to bring up here. I think if I am honest with myself, I need to watch that I don't fall into this. He describes faux intellectual as someone who doesn't want to have new ideas, but wants to discuss them. So I think that's where the action items are helpful with Bookworm, because it would be very easy if we didn't have any action items to just talk about the things every other week and then not do anything about them. And you could argue that we still don't do anything about them because we fail on our action items frequently, but
that's true.
At least we try.
That's true. But there's also like the intellectual side of talking about your own ideas. But I think what he's referring to in the faux intellectual is that of people who are talking about other people's ideas and not their own. And
sure, yep.
And more critiquing what other people have come up with as opposed to being a source of those to begin with. I saw this in corporate all the time, which we'll talk about thought police here in a bit, but like in corporate, it was pretty common for us to do these brainstorming sessions, which I always thought were hilarious because there were some ideas that weren't allowed. And if an idea that wasn't allowed was brought up as a potential solution to whatever it is we were trying to solve, somebody in there was the faux intellectual who would just sit and critique everything that came out of somebody's mouth. And like, you're not being helpful here when you're doing that, because they felt like they needed to talk about all these ideas, but they would always find something wrong with them.
Sure.
And that was forever the thing that was happening. But I think that's what he's referring to in a faux intellectual, just that they're not necessarily being the source of the topic of conversation, but they want to talk about what everybody else is talking about, even though they're not necessarily helping the conversation, which is where he had the comment in there. Is like people are regularly interrupting these faux intellectuals whenever they're in the middle of their discussion, saying, so what you're saying is, like, you're trying to like complete the thoughts for them because they can't put all the thoughts together themselves because they don't actually understand what's happening. They're just trying to be, a voice in the conversation.
There's a phrase in here that really challenged me. He says, you can be a good thinker and a poor speaker, which means the inverse is also true. You can be a poor thinker, but a good speaker. And talks about faux intellectuals making simple things sound complicated, whereas a good idea does the opposite. It makes complicated things seem simple. And I think I need to be on guard for this, where I'm not just talking about somebody else's idea. I mean, Bookworm is built on this premise. We read these books with ideas that other people have, and then we talk about them.
Yes.
So
Yes.
This is the platform for faux intellectuals, if there
Absolutely.
ever was one. But we need to, I think one thing that helps with that is the Mortimer Adler How to Read a Book approach. We've read enough books that we're not just talking about the idea in isolation inside of the book. We're comparing it against other things that we've read and heard and trying to figure out where is the truth based off of all of these thoughts that we've collected over the years. That's the biggest takeaway from Bookworm for me, is just the sheer volume of the books that we've read, and how I don't get sucked into any one book being, oh, this is the complete answer. This is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Reference to a fiction book there for those who caught it.
42.
Right. But I think I probably do slip into this from time to time. So I want to make sure that, especially with my Toastmasters training, I feel like I am a fairly decent communicator, and I don't want to let that mask poor thinking. I want to make sure that I have thought through things before I even open my mouth.
Yeah, I know that it's regularly a thing. This will sound terrible. At funerals, if you go to a lot of funerals, you tend to see patterns. And when you run the AV equipment for funerals, you go to a lot of funerals. So it's not uncommon that there's like an open mic period during a funeral for family reflections. And you always know who the people are who have good ideas, articulated them ahead of time, wrote their outline, wrote their notes, and then worked on how to present that, knowing that they're going to be emotional during that time. And then you have the people who wrote their notes in the lobby before they went up there, and it's always way long, and you're not really sure what they're talking about. And sometimes you're wondering if they're talking about the deceased or not, and it's just not connected at all. So you absolutely can be a good speaker with good ideas, but you can also be a good speaker with bad ideas, or have good ideas and be a bad speaker. Like, you can be any of those.
Or be a poor speaker and a poor thinker and just go up to the microphone because everybody else is.
Correct, and that's the worst. Please don't do that. Oh, those are fun. Those are super fun.
Right. Well, that's all I want to talk about with that one. Let's move on to the next one because you mentioned it. Number 13 is think about the thought police. And the thought police basically view change as disrespectful. I like that term, disrespectful. If I'm honest with myself, I can locate specific points where I have viewed change as unnecessary and disrespectful, especially when it's instigated from some place that you don't expect it to come from. And I'm curious, he mentions in here that when a group elevates conventional wisdom, it's hard to get a new idea past them. In that instance, they are acting as the thought police. So where do you let conventional wisdom win, and where have you caught yourself acting as the thought police?
I'm not sure where I've done that. I'm usually the one inflicting change, so I don't know where I sit in on this. Like the question you put in the outline, what areas do you let conventional wisdom win? I think, like in my case, I tend to let conventional wisdom win when it's a known and I don't have time to figure out what an alternative is. Like, there's a lot of time involved in that. Like, if I have infinite time, I will, if I don't want to go with conventional wisdom and I have all the time in the world, I will agonize over finding the loophole in the puzzle to try to work my way around it. Like, I will find the solution somewhere, somehow I will find it. And like, that's me. But I also know, being the one who inflicts the change, like, I know that it's a process that I have to go through to help people accept that change, because conventional wisdom is being challenged and I'm about to remove it from their lives in whatever area it is, like whether it's email or calendaring or chat systems, who knows. But that's me. So I don't know how I fit in on this. I'm generally one that likes change, so I don't feel like I fight it very often. I don't know. This one I don't have answers on this one.
Okay. Well, I think for me, when I engage with a group, I try to very quickly figure out what all of the norms are. Last two working experiences with Asian Deficiency and then Blanc Media, very different. There's strengths and weaknesses with each of the approaches. I know it's going to be different going from one to the other. So I go into it just trying to feel out what are the rules that everybody's playing by here. Once I figure out what those rules are, I don't like those rules to be challenged. So when someone new comes in and says, hey, we should do this, my initial reaction is, no. The culture is this. Just don't fight it. Just swim this direction, And so I think that's a spot where I could do a better job of not defaulting to conventional wisdom. Conventional meaning this is the culture of the organization and just the way things are. usually when I come into a situation, I am fairly eager to try to make some changes. If I see something that I consider like this is a problem or there's a better way to do this, I'll float those ideas and I'll kind of see how they're received and see what happens with those. But what I absolutely can't stand personally for some reason is someone to say, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that." And then nothing happens. To me, that's worse than a personal insult. I don't know why I get so upset with that, but I really do. It's like, let's just let our yes be yes, our no be no. If you really don't like this idea, that's fine. I can take that. I'll play by your rules, but don't tell me we're going to do something and then not do that. To me, that's like lying to my face. It's like, when I put it that way, this isn't consciously what's going on, but I think maybe I'm sort of judging the character of the person I'm interacting with when that happens, which again, this is my problem, not theirs. I need to get over this. I understand that, but this is how my brain works. And so this is what I'm fighting against, is my own internal thought police.
Yep. Yeah. I know that we give David Allen a lot of grief in getting things done with GTD, but one of the tenets that I've loved and regularly hold up to is what's the next action. Like, until you define what that next action is, it's just an idea. Like, you can't say it's a project that's in motion until you've defined that step. And every time I've had an idea and someone says, "Hey, that's great, we should do that," I make sure like the next sentence out of my mouth is an encouragement to figure out what the first step is to make that happen. And usually it's a question of, "Sure, that's great. So are you taking that? Are you going to make that phone call? Am I going to make that phone call? Who's got the lead on this? What's the next step? And when should that be done?" Like, those are the questions that I immediately jump to, because I know if you don't, it's just gone. It just is. I've had this, I don't know how many times. We've got a couple new members on our staff that say, "I know things have been done this way a long time, but I think we should." Like, okay, great. If you think that's what should be done, I'm not saying I agree with you that should be done, because I'm like Mike in this case and saying, well, I know how the culture works here, so I don't think that's going to fly, but you're welcome to try. And whenever we go down that path, like, okay, if you think that's a great idea, here are the 4 people you need to talk to. You're welcome to do that at your leisure. I don't care, because I don't see this. Like, this is not something that resonates with me, so you're not going to get me fired up to help you in this case. At least not when your start time here at the office was 2 weeks ago. Like, you're not going to get my support for some big culture change after you've been here for 2 weeks and don't understand how our current culture works. But here are the steps you need to take if you think that's the right path. And sometimes just defining what those next steps are is all it takes for them to realize that it's a much bigger deal than what they thought it was. I had this just earlier this morning. I had somebody in that we were walking around. There's an event coming up that they're going to run, and they had an idea that they wanted. It was completely different than what we normally do. It involved, the sound system. It's like, it's fine. And it's like, I want to do this particular process, but it requires some timing. It's like, sure, that's great. We haven't done that before, but if you want to do that, here are the steps it would take to make that happen. And if you want to take all those steps, that's fine. We can go down that path, but you just need to know what you're asking. Like, I'm just going to spell out, here's what that means. Immediately, it's not that, it's just a very minor detail. It's not worth all that. Like, okay, great. So we won't do that. So maybe that's just me. If I define what the process is to make something happen and it's not a simple thing, it goes away very quickly. I don't know how I got on that or where that was going, but I thought it was fun.
I think there's some sort of balance to be struck there, though, because I think there is a possibility that the process could be simpler. And in a lot of instances, especially when you've done it this way for these many years, it's easy to just say, oh, this is hard and complicated. An outside perspective is the perfect one to say, hey, this is how this could be simpler. So I don't know. What I'm struggling with is balancing, this is everything that's going to be required based off of my experience to make this happen, with the new person's optimism, like, oh, we could just do it like this. Maybe my initial reaction is to resist that and be like, no, probably not.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be the wet blanket for every new idea.
Yes.
So,
yes. But there's also an emotional side to this too.
mm-hmm.
And like, okay, so take that example this morning. I know, like, if I spent some time, I could probably find a simpler way to make that happen, but I really don't want to. So my gut reaction is to explain how complex it is.
Sure.
Because I don't want to do it. But if it were my event and I wanted it to happen, I would find a way to make that simple. Like there's that emotional side that's involved here. Now, in this case, I didn't know this person ahead of time, so I don't really have any back and forth with them. It's just one case. This happens all the time. I do this all the time. So
it happens all the time, and I would argue you're on either end of this.
Yes.
All the time.
Yes. Regularly, yeah. And there's a lot of cases where it's something I'm trying to get done, and I know that somebody just explained it to me in the most complicated way. But me knowing that that's what people do, I look for loopholes in what they just explained. Like, okay, you said this and this, but that step right there could be shortcut, and then that other 2/3 you told me was super complex goes away. Like, that's what I look for, but that's because I know I do that. So
yeah, and that's the balance that I think is healthy to find in any organization, any workplace, any ministry team.
Yeah.
Wherever you've got a group of people who are trying to do something together, there's got to be this give and take between this is the way things are and allowing the new ideas and the potential shortcuts, like giving them space to entertain those as possibilities.
Yeah.
It's easy when you have too much to do and not enough time to do it in to just throw that under the rug and stomp it out and be like, no, we don't have time to even consider that because we have these other things that need to be done. And I find myself being guilty of both ends of this. I've also been guilty of the one, well, we can just do this. Like, it'll be simple. No, it's not that simple. What do you mean it's not that simple? Sure it is. Let's just do it. So
that never happens.
Yeah. But that kind of leads into the next one here, because number 14, it says, this just in, we're mortal. This talks about the lifespan of ideas. So when you're talking about being on either end of that spectrum, somebody floating an idea and you just coming back with a complicated process, this is the way we actually do things around here, or vice versa, you're floating this idea, someone says, no, it's too complicated, and you're trying to challenge that and make something a little bit simpler. I think the tendency from the folks who are just trying to move on with the process is to say, now's not the time to disrupt things. But the counter argument to that is that this idea has life right now, and it's not always going to have life because the lifespan of ideas is not infinite. So I've also been thinking about this where timing factors into an idea and whether it is successful. And how do you properly determine what is the right time for an idea? I don't think about this a whole lot in terms of just my internal stuff. I throw things that I think might be valuable someday into Obsidian, and then I'll play with them. If not, they'll die, whatever. That just means that it wasn't that good of an idea. But this gets complicated when you work with other people and you don't want to be the person who is constantly challenging people to change things because no one's going to like that, or constantly being the one who's like, no, we're not going to change things because that will kill youthful enthusiasm for somebody new to your team or organization as well.
Yeah, this is for timing of ideas. This is something I think about a lot, actually, and I say that because I tend to have thoughts about how certain individuals, volunteers, teammates, departments, I tend to think about how they could improve different things. And just off the top of my head, I can think of like 4 or 5 big departmental changes that I want to recommend at some point, but the people and the situations aren't ready for those ideas yet. And like if I take my video team, like there's a certain level of video quality that I want to take us to, but they're not ready for me to recommend that yet. And if I were to recommend it now, I know they would get excited about it, but they're not ready skill-wise for it. And
exactly,
they need to spend at least a couple more years with the trajectory that we're currently on to get comfortable with where I just took them before I can introduce that. So
right,
it's not ready yet. So you got to sit on it and wait for that timing, because it's going to be a train wreck if I try to do it now.
And that's the fascinating thing about this particular section, because sitting on it does not mean that you set it on the back burner until later.
Mm-mm.
There's this concept of speed that's introduced in this section. On page 93, he says, although we all complain about not having enough time, speed when properly managed can be your friend. So, and he also says ideas respond well to a closed door and a deadline, implying that these ideas don't really gain traction until you've got some motivation to actually make them happen. So when you are incubating them, what you're trying to do is ride your bicycle very slowly and not fall over.
Yes.
While at the same time working out, doing bench press and curls on your upper body so that you can
while you're moving slowly.
Actually,
yes.
yeah. And this just seems, when I think about it that way, this seems really, really complicated, and it probably is overly complicated. It probably doesn't need to be that complicated. But I am fascinated by this whole concept, because I really do believe that the right thing at the wrong time can be the wrong thing. And I don't know what the solution is, but this definitely helped me think about some different situations with some different teams that I'm involved with. And how do you determine the right time for an idea? Again, I don't necessarily have an answer to this, but this chapter, I think you could read it and it could do one of two things. One, it could kind of discourage you as an idea person, like, I got to take action on these ideas now, otherwise they're going to die. That there is some truth to that. You could also be on the other end of that and kind of recognize, like, when these ideas become presented to you, that you can't just shove them in a box and leave them till later. Every idea collection system I've seen in the different companies and organizations that I've been a part of, that has been the problem with those idea buckets, is people put stuff in there and then it never comes out. So we're trying some new things actually at Blanc Media and the Suite Setup to try to take action on these ideas more quickly, because when you have them and you put them in there, like, that's usually when you have the best chance of it actually translating into something positive for the organization, I feel. And we've recognized that, you throw stuff in there and then 6 months later, if you revisit it, you forget sometimes what even you were talking about when you put it in there. So I think if you're going to try to do this with a team, there has to be a way to not just capture the ideas, but also to do something with them quickly. And then also maybe alongside that, you're actively choosing the ideas that you're not going to be taking action on, which kind of comes back to that conversation you were talking about, the person you knew who, whenever they had an idea, they built and sold a business. Can't be that simple. My head is like still trying to wrap around that statement. Like, there's got to be a bunch of stuff you're saying no to. I mean, that's what we read in every single book, is you have to say no. So there's got to be a way to do that.
I suspect in his case, not to keep dredging that one up, but I suspect, because my brain, of course, has been processing that one since we talked about it earlier, but I wonder if there's some level of, he has a bunch of like the ideas that he would like to act on in the future, but doesn't write them down because they're so interesting in his brain. He just goes over them many times mentally and knows them that way as they come up. And he's actively building them just all in his brain. And whenever he sells a business, he's worked on it for so long over the last 2-3 years as he was building his other business that he's ready to start moving on it the moment he sells the one. And I wonder if he actually sells the first one when he's ready to start the second one, just because he's tired of the first one. These are my thoughts. I don't know if any of this is true or not. This is me speculating, but
that's all. It seems to me that's also the type of person who would argue they don't need a task manager, because they're just constantly thinking about something.
He does. Like, his is ridiculous too. So so he doesn't fit that. Like, it's the problem. Like, this guy is not. I should see if I could have him on an interview at some point. I don't know that he would do that.
That'd be cool.
He's strange.
Sure. Well, the last section here, I mean, this maybe is a good leadway into this. Number 18, we don't know what we don't know until we do what we don't usually do. So my brain is breaking, thinking about just taking action on every single idea, especially on the scale of starting and selling a business. But I've never actually tried that. And the very first page in this section, on page 116, it's a bunch of garbled letters. And the point with this exercise is a research study that shows when you have the first letter and the last letter of the word, your brain can kind of figure out what is in the middle. And at first you start and you don't even realize that you're starting to unscramble this text. And after about 4 or 5 words in, I started to realize what was happening here, and they're like, oh, I can do this. So let's just keep going. And then they have a whole page of this where they're talking about how this is what your brain is actually doing. So they kind of trick you into doing it at first, I feel like. And then they say, see, you didn't think you could do this, but your brain totally can do this. And there's research behind this. I immediately thought of speed reading after I had done this.
Interesting. Okay.
I've gone through the Rev It Up reading course by Abby Marks Beal before and improved my reading speed and retention by doing that, but I've never considered myself a speed reader. Okay, and Abby, I've interviewed her back when I was with Asian Efficiency and the Productivity Show. She would say there's just different gears that you click into in terms of how quickly you read something. And most people don't actively say, I'm going into speed reading mode now. They're just reading more quickly. They're going into gear 5. That I liked. I do think that when you are reading quickly, what you are doing, especially if you're implementing some of the practices that she talks about in that course, where you're just kind of systematically going through the page, like following your finger as you're swiping it across the page, or you've got the note card and you're going down and just uncovering more text, you can force your brain to go quicker than it thinks it can. And my experience from going through that course was, even though I felt like I wasn't able to keep up, you go through the quizzes at the end and you find that you actually did remember a bunch of what you read. That's not my preferred method for going through books for Bookworm. You can't do that when you're taking notes in a MindNote file. But I think there is some truth to that, just the practice, and this is totally not the point they were trying to make, but page 116, I view that as evidence that speed reading does actually work.
I can't say I'm going to speed read, like go through the speed reading thing, but I think that the title here, we don't know what we don't know until we do what we don't usually do. This is reminiscent of the chapter in the last book of, break your routines and do something different. It's the last one, two ago. When you do things different than you used to do just to figure out things that you don't know, I think we're very often surprised at how far you can go with that. I have never rewired a breaker box in my life. Never. And yet I understand electricity quite well. And jumping into a breaker box to rewire a major portion of our house was a little intimidating. But when I stood and just looked at it for a little bit, it occurred to me, oh, yeah, I know how this all works, and I know how I want this to work so that it's clean. And that was the next piece. That's shocking. You guys in the chat. The part that's always interesting is like and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier, when you push yourself past the point of comfort, when you go past that point, you start to realize just how much you're capable of. And it's usually a lot more than what you think you can do. And despite the limits that we tend to put on ourselves, you can go really, really far. And I remember this specifically with our youngest daughter. Last summer, we took our girls hiking up into some mountains. And at the time, Hazel was 3 and had her up the mountain. The kid hiked up this, I think it was like a 4-mile trail up into the mountains, 3 years old. And then we're coming back down. Now, the way it was working coming back down, like there was a very specific path. Like adults, we could just step down a rock. She's 3. Like the rock is bigger than she is. So you can't just step down when you're a 3-year-old. So what I told her, because she was losing her mind with mom. So mom was not the right person for this. So like, follow me, Hazel. Like you walk where my feet go. I will walk in a path that I know you can cover. And I will go where I know you can get down this mountain. So she starts following my steps for about 2.5 miles of this, which, number one, it's a lot harder workout for an adult to take 3-year-old steps coming down a mountain than it is to just walk down rocks. But she realized about halfway through that she could do this and that she could figure this out. And although she was following my path, every once in a while she would deviate from it because she saw a better way that I hadn't seen. And she started to feel that empowerment of, I can do this, because I had been able to, I don't want to say trick, but I was able to show her how she could do this and how she could go further than what she was able to do. Now, the fun part of that story is there was a 5-year-old boy in a family that was following us down this trail who was just losing his mind because it was too hard. And Dad at one point said, there's a little girl in front of you who's younger than you that can do this. Why can't you do this? That boy instantly shifted gears and was able to do it with no issue. So anyway, my point is your brain can go much further than you think it can if you're willing to push it.
Nice. I think that's
Hazel.
a great place to wrap it up and gives me inspiration for my next bookworm book.
Yeah?
Yep.
Well, let's not go there yet.
Not yet. Is there any action items that you have from this book?
No. And I say that knowing that the concept of coming up with ideas, which is primarily what this is about, like generating ideas, this is one that we've talked about before, and I feel like I've built really good systems for this. Systems, habits, I don't know what you want to call it, but processes that
routines?
I do, maybe
daily
routines.
Rituals, maybe?
Whatever you want to call it, take your pick. Yeah, daily rituals. Like that process is one that I've worked on intentionally, and this just confirms that that's a lot of the right thing that I should be doing. So no, I don't have any action items for this.
Sure.
Sorry. Fail.
I don't have any action items either, and I was a little surprised by that. I started to think about why did I not jot down any action items, even my generic no way to hold me accountable to them action items that I'm so famous for on this podcast. And I feel the big win with this book is simply recognizing the environmental factors that can kill an idea. Do you think that's fair?
But there's a lot of those, I suppose. Yeah,
There is.
if you go through this, you start to realize that's a good point. I don't think it crossed my mind that there are that many ways that ideas get suffocated. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think almost every single one of these chapters is kind of a warning against a specific thing that could kill an idea. Even like number 10, embrace diversity, it will hug you back. That is framed in a positive perspective of embracing diversity, but I think the place that it becomes applied is when you recognize that you are in a culture where there is a lack of diversity. So I think every single one of these,
Yeah.
with the exception of the last chapter, is watch out for this thing, you know? And I think there's value in that. So I guess kind of getting into style and rating here, this is not necessarily the book that I thought it was going to be going into it, but I did very much enjoy this. And I think there's a lot of value to be had from this. I think this is one of those books that I would kind of recommend to just about anybody. I think it's a very easy read. I think it's a really cool format. I think it's a very engaging read. Was kind of surprised, like I said, that I didn't have anything super specific that I wanted to change having gone through this. But I think, to your point, that's kind of the result of us thinking about this topic for a while. If this is the first book that you're picking up before liminal thinking, something like that, maybe it hits you a little bit different. I did have a bunch of things in my outline here where it was like, oh, I want to talk to Joe about this one. So maybe those are the action items, is like we just talked through a bunch of these things in a podcast, and that was really all the action that was required there. But I do think that my perspective on some of this stuff has changed just from the result of this conversation. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. It's a very easy read. It doesn't take a ton of time to get through this one. I'm going to rate this at 4 stars because there wasn't anything in here that felt really life-changing to me. But I do think there's a lot of good stuff in here. And I think just about anybody can pick this up, go through it, and walk away from it with a bit of a perspective change. I think it would be very hard to go through this book and not be changed in some way. That's why I say, looking at all these chapters and kind of the warnings that they're sounding in these different areas, I feel even if you don't have any action items like you and I do, they paint pictures of scenarios that you can identify in your own life, and you can kind of put a flag in the ground for the next time I'm in this sort of situation, I might approach it a little bit differently. Even if you don't have or articulate that specific thought, I feel like your approach will be a little bit different just from having gone through this. So I think the style was really good. The art is interesting, not exactly my thing, but I do appreciate the originality of the design and the cardboard cover and all that. I feel like it works. It all kind of comes together. So yeah, 4.0 is where I'm landing on this one. And this is kind of weird because typically the books that I would blanket recommend to absolutely everybody tend to be the 5.0s. You got to read this. This will change your world. This one is not that, but I feel has broad appeal. So
yeah, it's a good point. And I like the comment on the style of the book, because let's go all the way back to the beginning. When I picked it up, I thought it was a kid's book, right? Well, what do we know about like kids in general? They're super creative. Like they haven't had all the norms and routines and stuff to fall into, so they will often regularly break routine and come up with creative, like, why are you trying to walk across a bed of acorns in bare feet? Like, what possessed you to try to do it? Like, obviously you've got splinters in your feet. You were walking across acorns in the parking lot. Like, I don't know how you came up with this. Anyway, kids and creativity are kind of a known connecting point. This having a slight throwback to kids' books probably isn't that far out of brand for this. So I love that. I love that they put that, those little touches are there, and I like that quite a bit. This book, obviously, like you said, it's easy to read. I feel like this book, and I'm realizing this because of this book, in that some books feel like they're written in a way that they're easy to discuss. Some books are written for me to process on my own time. And this one, I didn't realize this till you and I sat down and talked about it, because whenever I read this and I was processing it on my own, it's like, there's some cool things in here, but I really didn't think much about it. It doesn't really change the way I process these things, but obviously as we process this stuff out loud and with each other, like, oh yeah, this book is really, really well set up for discussion, and it's really good for that. So I suspect that this is one that, yeah, I would agree with you. It's one I would recommend to most people. I don't know if I would blanket recommend it, knowing that I've got some folks that think the idea management thing is for the birds. So, okay, I still don't. I gotta catch this guy and have another conversation. But anyway, this is one that I feel like if you're gonna read this, it would be amazing to find somebody else to read it alongside, and then grab dinner or something and talk about it, like do a book club thing with it. Like, it would be super cool to do that. So this one I feel like is really well set up for that. You can get a lot out of it if you read it on your own, but I do think it would be helpful to process it with someone. Maybe that's just me showing my bias towards being able to do this with Mike every 2 weeks, but there's that. 4.0 is exactly where I feel it should be. So that's where I will put it as well. Because again, like, I don't feel like it's complete life-changing, but I feel like it's important to know. Like,
yeah.
It's not going to completely change the way you run meetings or idea generation processes with your coworkers. Like, it's not going to completely change that, but it will make you aware of how this process works that could then have a second-order consequence later for how you react to someone else's idea and how you process that. So I don't think it's a direct correlation, but I think the second order on it would be super helpful. But again, one-to-one, it's not going to be a direct connection there. That's what I'm trying to say. There you go, 4.0.
Cool. So let's put the art of the idea on the shelf. What's next, Joe Bulig?
Yeah, so next we're going to jump into Daily Rituals, How Artists Work by Mason Curry. And I am starting this one tonight, so I haven't got a precursor on it, but I know that you have read this one before, and I know many people have told me that this is a really good one to start, and being in a spot where a lot of my rituals and such are about to change. I really wanted to know how people do this whole daily ritual concept as an artist, so I figured I'd drag everybody along for the ride.
This will be a fun one. I am curious to see what this outline looks like.
I am terrified to see how this outline is going to come together. I have already been trying to... I read the outline, like the table of contents for this one, and I have no idea how we're going to do this, but I got to start processing how to do that one now so that by the time we get there in 2 weeks, we'll be okay.
Right.
All right, so daily rituals, then what, Mike? What'd you pick?
Well, you were talking about the different ways that our brains can be pushed beyond what we think we're capable of. And I have this book recommended to me by David Sparks sitting on my bookshelf. And I think this is a perfect follow-up to this conversation, which is a follow-up to the liminal thinking conversation. So I am picking The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. The subtitle is The Power of Thinking Outside the Brain. In the description, it talks a little bit about Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence. So just to warn you, but I think there's a whole lot more to be unpacked here. This is just something I am fascinated about at the moment. And there's other books that speak to this topic. I have another one on my bookshelf called Brain Rules, I believe, which I've read in the past. But this whole neuroscience thing is just an itch that needs to be scratched for me at the moment.
I feel like we've hit a groove of like, okay, this one got me thinking about this, which means I need to do this. And then that got me thinking about X, Y, and Z. So, yes.
Which on that topic, if you want to read more books, that's the way to do it, is to engage with the ones that are interesting to you. This one's longer. I'll let you know ahead of time. It is 352 pages. So it's going to take a while, but it is also an Amazon editor's pick for one of the best books of 2021 so far. So kind of
fascinating,
highly acclaimed.
Sure.
If you will.
All right. Start that one early. Cool.
Yep.
All right. What's on the Gap book list, Mike? You got one this time? I certainly do not. Forget that.
I do.
Okay.
I have this book. I'm not finished with it yet, but it is called Analog Church by J. Kim.
Okay.
And this is basically about how in the Christian circles that you and I are a part of, there is this tendency to embrace technology and be relevant as it pertains to the culture. And I think there is some value in that. But this is basically saying that in a digital culture, what people are wanting and needing is analog connection. And so this guy has a kind of fascinating background where he's been a part of all these different styles of churches, big mega churches with multiple campuses, and kind of recognizing that all of these technology tools, like we've kind of lost the plot in some of the implementation of these. He was at the beginning of the book, he talks about he was giving a message, and one of the tech guys is like, make sure that you look directly into the camera so that the people at the other campuses feel like you're connecting with them. And he was just kind of heartbroken. He's like, I don't even see these people. I'm not really connecting with them. So
yeah.
It's got me thinking.
Yeah. I need to pick this one up based on what you just described, because I spend a lot of time making sure our tech is all about bringing people together and not helping people be isolated. That's a core tenet that I have for the tech side of this church. So that
in the introduction, he references Sherry Turkle and Cal Newport.
Okay, I'm sold. On it. Like I said, I do not have Gap books, but thanks everybody who joined us today. That's for sure.
Thank you to our Bookworm Club premium members as well, who are willing to support us financially, help us keep the lights on, pay for somebody else to edit these podcast episodes now, which is pretty great. If you want to join, you can go to bookworm.fm/membership, and you get a couple of perks. You get some Gap book episodes that Joe did before he started remodeling a house, and you get the MindNode files from all the books that I read and I upload to the club. There's both the PDF versions and also the MindNode versions, so you can download them if you have MindNode yourself, and you can kind of make them your own. There's also a cool wallpaper, which I designed a while back, and I didn't think that was that great, but people seem to like it. So
yeah,
bookworm.fm/membership.
There you go. Awesome. Well, if you are wanting to read books, get more ideas, develop ideas, be amazing at ideas, you need to read books. And the best one you can pick up right now is Daily Rituals by Mason Curry. And then join us in 2 weeks, and we will cover it together. Thanks, team.